What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. So Malygos Druid is one of the stronger decks in Standard right now, and whether it's by bursting people down with spell damage or maybe getting a lucky Yogg-Saron, people are just tearing up the ladder with it, and it's definitely one of the more popular decks right now. But a lot of you guys might not know that a very similar style of Druid deck existed back in the early beta of Hearthstone. Spell Druid played pretty similar to the current Malygos Druid, but it had lots of really overpowered cards to work with before Druid just got a ton of nerfs. So without further ado, join us today in taking a look back at how OP Spell Druid used to be. Before we even get to the specific Spell Druid deck in question, which gained popularity in the beta, Druid itself in general was just overpowered by itself. Druid of the Claw was a 4/7 minion instead of a 4/6, and Force of Nature only cost 5 mana for the old version of the effect, which was the 3/2/2 Trance with Charge. This was changed back in an early beta patch, but it still gives us a good idea of how amazing the class truly was back then. Moving on though, since Spell Druid is slightly more obscure than decks like Miracle Rogue or maybe Freeze Mage, let's take a look at a list really quick so we know what kind of deck we're working with. This deck list was from a player named Vuck, who hit one of the highest ranks with it back in the early beta. Now a lot of the cards in this list are of course different from versions you probably know today, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So even though a lot of the cards might differ, the essential idea was pretty much the same. Play a lot of area of effect and removal, maybe some burst spells, and just a bunch of spell damage minions to add more power to the burst in AoE, and some card draw, and some value minions brings it all together, and overall you get left with a monster. So let's take a look at what made this deck truly overpowered. So first off, there was the combo of the old Savagery with Claw and Bite, and that's probably the most powerful combo that no longer exists today. The original version of Savagery cost 2 mana and dealt damage equal to your attack to all enemy minions, so it was a bit like having Blade Flurry in Druid, but Druid conveniently has cards that buff your attack for a turn like Claw and Bite, so you could essentially build your own Flame Strike that cost less mana and did more damage, not to mention that Claw and Bite used to give more attack than they do now as well. Claw gave 3 attack at the time, while Bite gave 6 attack, and it even cost 3 mana at one point as well. This was of course at the price of not giving armor instead, but with the old completely busted version of Savagery, you would way rather have more attack than more armor, and even today you'd probably still rather have the more attack anyway. These 3 cards combined with Druid hero power allowed players to just perform insane one-sided AoE clears, and then all the minions the Druid had could just attack the face since you wiped the board with your Savagery. You know, imagine casting a Bite, you get 6 attack, you cast a Savagery, clear your opponent's board completely, hit their face for 6, hit them with all your minions, and then you still have mana left over to actually play a minion yourself, and that's going to lead to some pretty insane turns, and overall, because of the power of the cards, it was actually quite consistent as well. Not to mention that Savagery did work with spell power. Now Savagery remained good even a little bit after it was nerfed to 3 mana in an alpha patch, but it became pretty terrible when it was changed to the current version that exists in the game today in a later on beta patch. Claw was changed to give 2 armor and 2 attack later on, which wouldn't necessarily have hurt the card too bad, but Savagery becoming obsolete made boosting your attack not as great anymore as well. And similarly, Bite was changed to giving 4 attack and 4 armor, and also had some mana cost changes until it arrived at the current version, but losing Savagery is probably what destroyed the most powerful version of the deck, because losing 2 mana Flame Strikes, well, that's gonna hurt a little bit. But other than the most notable card of Savagery, the deck also had a lot of additional really powerful tools. Well, up until a certain beta patch when it was removed, Wrath could actually be cast on heroes, which maybe won't seem like that big of a deal, but it really honestly just improves the card so much, which is really crazy because Wrath is already so damn good. Being able to hit face meant that not only could you use Wrath for lethal or pressuring life total, but in the event that there were no minions on the board, you could still use it to cycle it on your opponent's face to draw a card. Until it was changed, Wrath was essentially the most flexible card in the entire game in terms of spells, and while it's still an awesome card, it will never be the do-all card that it was back in the beta. Similarly to Wrath, both modes of Starfall as well also used to be able to go face until it was removed on the same patch as Wrath. Now this gave a lot of extra benefit when you cast it in the area of effect mode, but it also meant that you had a 5 damage burst spell if you needed it without having to sacrifice an additional card in your deck. With Wrath and Starfall being able to go face, along with all the other bursts in the deck and the spell damage minions, Spell Druid had a really easy time both dominating the board and bursting down their opponent from their hands, and it was almost a little bit like a better version of Freeze Mage at the time. There are also kinda two nerfs that took effect much more recently, but still did change some of the cards in the deck list we're looking at today, and so they're definitely still worth talking about, and that's Keeper of the Grove, which used to be a 2/4 rather than a 2/2, and honestly Spell Druid having access to a 2/4 Keeper of the Grove was a pretty strong element, since they could just play a minion with tons of survivability that also had really versatile effects. The other nerf that happened in the same patch was Big Game Hunter being changed from 3 mana to 5. Now Big Game Hunter probably wouldn't be a 2 of even today at 3 mana, but at the time that Spell Druid was popular. Handlock was already one of the best decks in the entire game, and you definitely needed to save your spells for bursting your opponent's face and their Jiraxis rather than using them inefficiently to kind of kill Molten, maybe Mountain Giants as well, and so double BGH meant that the deck didn't lose to big minions, and it had a good matchup versus Handlock, and it wasn't too much of a trade-off since Spell Druid was already good against the decks that didn't have BGH targets due to their super consistent AoE board clears. Ultimately though, Spell Druid's power came from both the insane value that Savagery would get you and the flexibility of all the spells in the deck to just give you so much consistency for either removal, burst, or anything you wanted. The deck was able to answer anything that was thrown at it, had very few bad matchups, and overall it was completely broken. Unfortunately though, all the nerfs in the deck hit pretty hard, and a similar version has only really recently resurfaced with the help of Yogg-Saron, Living Roots, and a couple of other newer cards. Still, it does make sense that Blizzard nerfed Savagery because in conjunction with Bite and Claw, building a deck around Savagery would have been the only thing that really made sense, and many other Druid archetypes would have been outclassed as a result if the card had remained in the game in its current state. So what are your thoughts on the beta version of Spell Druid? Definitely let us know in the comments below, and looks like that's gonna be it for me. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like, subscribe if you want. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.